Hi folks, hope you're okay today. It's good to be with you. I just want to share my thoughts about reading this book, and it's by Melvin Bragg, The Book of Books, The Radical Impact of the King James Bible, 1611-2011, and it's a really excellent read, very enjoyable. I just want to talk about a couple of topics. I think first we'll talk about Bible translations. Now, there's been debates over the last few years about the King James only debate, and some people are saying we should use the King James, and others saying we should use other translations, more freer translations, and it's no big deal. But I do think this. I think that it worries me on both sides. It worries me that people can say, well, we're only using the King James and no other Bible translation. I think that's unbalanced, because there can be good Bible translations done on the same kind of Greek manuscripts, in Hebrew manuscripts, as the King James was built on. So I don't think that's a good argument. On the other hand, there are these other people who say, well, any Bible translation will do so long as it's a literal one, say. I think that's a bad argument. I think it's a bad argument because we've got to ask who's doing the Bible translations. Now, in the time of the King James, the scholars that were doing the Bible translations were people who believed in God. They believed in the Bible. They were solid, great, mighty scholars. All of these modern Bible translations, many of them are by liberal scholars, and they're not being developed by the church, but by publishing companies. And so, for example, feminization of the Bible has come in some translations, and it's diluting the meaning of the Bible. So, I believe that we can't cut ourselves off from this King James tradition. The King James was a powerful Bible translation, and God has mightily used it. It was built on the William Tyndale translation, and so every Christian should be familiar with the King James and should continue to read it today. I continue to read it today. I continue to use it today. It's a very important Bible translation, but I don't think you should be a slave to it. I think you should also use a modern translation that is based on good Greek manuscripts from the Byzantine tradition, and good scholars. And those are my thoughts about Bible translation. I don't agree with the scholarship, the evangelical scholarship, that does Bible translations using the Alexandria tradition. It's quite clear that the Alexandria tradition is inferior in quality of manuscripts. Even though they might be older, they are inferior. And the Byzantine tradition, even though the manuscripts are from the 9th century, whatever, clearly have a strong claim to being a better tradition. And so anybody who is having a Bible translation, you need to make sure that you get a Bible translation based on the Byzantine manuscript tradition. And that's where the King James comes in. That was based on that. And I think any Christian needs to make sure that their Bible translation that they have is done by reputable Bible-believing scholars, who are not trying to feminize the church, who are not trying to politicize the church in any way, and are dumbing down the language. And you've got to be aware of that. So that's my first thing, Bible translations. Some of the Bible translations that I would recommend, I would recommend the English Standard Version, the ESV, the English Standard Version, which is, and the American Standard Version, the New King James Version, the King James Version. Those are just some of the ones that I would recommend. I do use the NIV, even though it's based on Alexandrian and Byzantine text. I do use the NIV from time to time, but if I'm doing a Bible study in a church or preaching, I use a more literal translation like the American Standard Version or the ESV or the New King James Version or something. But it will always be based on the King James. I'll always make sure that I've checked it with the King James and checked it with other more literal translations, etc. So those are my thoughts anyway on Bible translation. So I'm not King James only, but I am for the King James, but I'm not for all this. Any Bible translation will do. I think you've got to be discerning, but balanced in your discernment. Alright, thank you for listening. The Geneva Study Bible is a good one as well.